All right, let's set the scene here. Imagine this. It's February 2026. You're inside a garrison in Rawalpindi, and Pakistan's top generals are staring at these giant screens, watching satellite images flash by. They're looking at roads in Kabul, at known militant hideouts, at Taliban ammo dumps. But here's the thing. They're facing this really bizarre, deeply ironic problem. They're gearing up for a war against the very group they spent decades creating and propping up. So on February 27th, 2026, Pakistan's defense minister comes out with this bombshell declaration. Now look, if you follow this region at all, your first guess would be this war was against their old rival, India. I mean, that's the obvious one. But it wasn't. This open war was aimed squarely at the Taliban government running Afghanistan. And that really is the central question of all this, isn't it? How on earth did Pakistan end up at war with the same group its own intelligence agency practically built from the ground up? How did its greatest asset become its #1 enemy? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go back a bit. So let's rewind the clock to the 1990s. Afghanistan is just being torn apart by a brutal civil war, and Pakistan's military, well, they have a very specific plan for their neighbor, and that whole plan was built around one key idea. And that idea was called strategic depth. It's actually pretty simple when you break it down. The thinking was, if Pakistan could control Afghanistan by putting a friendly, pro-Pakistan government in power, it would basically create this huge strategic backyard, a buffer zone against its archenemy, India. And this one policy, this single idea, became the playbook for everything that came next. So, in 1994, Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, finds this little-known cleric, a guy named Mullah Omar. They make him a deal. We'll give you weapons, cash, training. You just have to go take over Afghanistan for us. And you know what? It worked. By 1996, the Taliban rolled into Kabul. Then, of course, 9/11 happens. And this is when Pakistan starts playing this incredibly dangerous double game. Publicly, they're America's big ally in the war on terror. But secretly, they're giving shelter and support to the very same Taliban leaders the U.S. was trying to hunt down. For 20 years, Pakistan thought it had this whole thing under control, that they could play both sides. But here's the thing about creating a force built on religious fanaticism. You can't really control it for long. And this entire policy was about to create a monster that would eventually turn on its own master. And that's where the Tehrik-e-Taliban, or TTP, comes in. These guys are the Pakistani Taliban. Many of them were trained in the same religious schools, fought right alongside the Afghan Taliban, but they were furious that Pakistan sided with the U.S. after 9/11, so they turned their guns on the Pakistani state itself, with one single violent goal: to burn it down and build their own state. And to try and achieve that goal, the TTP unleashed just unimaginable waves of bloodshed. But nothing shows you who they really are more than what they did on a cold December morning back in 2014 at the Army Public School in Peshawar. TTP gunmen stormed that school. They went from classroom to classroom, methodically executing children. 132 kids between 8 and 18 years old were murdered. It's one of the absolute darkest days in Pakistan's history and a horrifying sign of how badly this policy had spun out of control. Fast forward to the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. And that's when this situation, which had been simmering for years, just completely boiled over. Pakistan's leaders actually thought they'd won, but their whole double game was about to come crashing down. You see, in 2021, when the Taliban marched back into Kabul, Pakistan's prime minister at the time, Imran Khan, actually celebrated it. He said the Afghans had broken the chains of slavery. The Pakistani establishment really believed their puppets were finally back in charge. But oh man, was that a fatal miscalculation. Instead of getting peace, the violence against Pakistan just exploded. And the cost of that miscalculation was just devastating. Take a look at these numbers. In 2024, more than 2,200 people died in terror attacks in Pakistan. The very next year, in 2025, that number almost doubled to over 4,000. I mean, the crisis was just spiraling out of control. So here's the absolute nightmare scenario Pakistan was facing. Its biggest enemy, the TTP, was being protected and given safe haven across the border in Afghanistan by its oldest proxy and supposed ally, the Afghan Taliban. The exact same tactic Pakistan had used against the Americans for 2 decades was now being turned right back on them. So you have this impossible situation, right, where your so-called friend is sheltering your sworn enemy. It just couldn't last. It was a strategic dead end, and it was pretty much guaranteed to lead to open war. And the Afghan Taliban? Well, they were trapped between a rock and a hard place. If they cracked down on the TTP to make Pakistan happy, they risked thousands of those battle-hardened TTP fighters just defecting to their main rival, ISIS-K, which would create a huge security threat inside Afghanistan. But if they did nothing, they'd face a full-on war with Pakistan. They ended up choosing to do nothing. And from there, things just escalated fast. In late 2025, Pakistan did something it had never done before. It launched airstrikes on Kabul. The Taliban, of course, hit back. Then, in February 2026, after another deadly TTP attack, the Taliban launched their own organized cross-border assault. And that was the last straw. Pakistan officially declared open war. Which brings us to the great and really tragic irony in all of this. Back in the 90s, Pakistan created the Taliban to get an edge on India. Today, that very same Taliban is protecting the group that's waging war on Pakistan. And here's the ultimate twist. The Taliban government is now cutting trade and infrastructure deals with India, the one country this entire policy was designed to counter in the first place. It's a complete 100% strategic failure. For decades, Pakistan's entire strategy was basically to light a fire in its neighbor's yard, hoping the smoke would keep its own house safe. But that fire has now jumped the fence, and it is burning hotter than ever. The question now isn't just whether Pakistan can put out the flames, but how many more people have to get burned in the process.